The maitre d' smiled, a tight, professional curve that didn't quite reach his eyes. A familiar expression I'd seen directed at countless patrons navigating the polished waters of high-end dining. "I'm terribly sorry," he began, his voice smooth as polished marble, the kind that could soothe or subtly disarm. "But this table is reserved." He gestured vaguely, a flick of his wrist encompassing a prime spot by the window, a tableau bathed in the warm, late afternoon light, the kind that lent an almost ethereal glow to the hushed conversations and clinking silverware. "For family." He let the word hang in the air, a subtle but firm declaration, a meticulously crafted shield against any lingering doubt. My own family stood behind me, a silent, expectant tableau, their collective breath held in anticipation, unaware of the shifting currents beneath the surface. The air in the opulent restaurant, moments before buzzing with anticipatory chatter, the pleasant hum of a successful evening unfolding, suddenly felt thin, charged with an unspoken tension, as if the very molecules had been rearranged by his pronouncement. It was clear with a disquieting certainty that the reservation was for them, for the curated unit, not for me, the seemingly extraneous element. We'd arrived together, a group of 7, a constellation of familiar faces united by the occasion, expecting a celebratory dinner for my father's significant birthday. Weeks ago my sister, the designated planner, the one who meticulously orchestrated such events, had booked this place, a renowned establishment known for its discreet service and exquisite cuisine. She'd assured everyone, including me, her tone confident and reassuring, that it was all sorted, a done deal. Yet, here we were, met with this polite dismissal, this gentle but absolute exclusion, a subtle redirection that spoke volumes. The waiter, a different man now, one with a less familiar face and a more watchful demeanor, hovered nearby, a silent observer of our unfolding discomfort, his presence a silent testament to the gravity of the situation. He held a discreet tablet, its dark surface reflecting the ambient light, his expression a mask of professional neutrality, trained to process without betraying any personal judgment. My father, ever the diplomat, the man who had spent a lifetime navigating complex social landscapes with grace, tried to smooth things over, his voice tinged with the weariness of someone who'd encountered similar slights before, though perhaps not this blatant, this personal. "Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding," he offered, a gentle attempt to bridge the chasm that had suddenly appeared between us and the promised evening. My mother stood beside him, a pillar of quiet support, her hand resting on his arm, a gesture of solidarity, her gaze flicking between the maitre d' and me, a silent question in her eyes, a mirror to my own unspoken anxieties. My siblings, usually boisterous and full of life, their laughter a familiar soundtrack to our gatherings, were subdued, their faces a mixture of confusion and dawning realization, the subtle shift in the atmosphere too profound to ignore. They'd been invited, they were here, present and accounted for, but the implicit message, delivered with such practiced ease, was that I somehow didn't quite fit the definition of family that this particular maitre d' was working with tonight, a definition that seemed to have been narrowly and purposefully defined. The maitre d' shook his head, his smile unwavering, an unyielding monument to his protocol. "The reservation is specifically for Mr. and Mrs. Sterling and their immediate children. All 7 guests are accounted for." He paused, his gaze drifting over my siblings, a fleeting acknowledgement of their presence, then settling ever so briefly on me. It was a moment, a fraction of a second, that carried the weight of an entire conversation, an unspoken indictment. The implication was clear, though delivered with the finesse of a seasoned performer. I was the anomaly, the plus one who wasn't quite welcomed into the inner circle of this particular celebration, the one who didn't belong to the select group designated by a nebulous but powerful authority. My sister, the one who had booked the table, the architect of this meticulously planned event, avoided my eyes, a subtle but telling shift in her posture. She'd mentioned something vague about managing the guest list, when I'd confirmed my attendance, a phrase that now echoed with a hollow dismissive ring, a veiled warning that had gone unheeded. The awkwardness descended like a heavy cloak, muffling the previously cheerful ambience. The other diners, their faces momentarily turning towards us, their curiosity piqued by the unusual pause at the entrance, then quickly averting their gazes, not wanting to be implicated in any potential drama, added to the humiliation, a subtle but palpable sense of being under scrutiny. Assent an outright scene, no raised voices or dramatic pronouncements, no public spectacle designed to elicit pity or outrage, but the quiet, cold dismissal was a palpable force, a sophisticated form of ostracization that felt more profound in its subtlety. My father sighed, a soft exhalation of defeat, the sound barely audible above the low murmur of conversation. Perhaps another time, he said, his voice barely audible, a resigned concession to the inevitable, and began to steer my mother away from the entrance, towards the less desirable tables near the bar, a concession to their comfort, an attempt to salvage the evening for the rest of the group. As my family shuffled off, a quiet, almost imperceptible resignation settling over them, their shoulders slumping slightly, the waiter approached, his movements precise and efficient. He was no longer the unobtrusive observer, but the executor of a less visible, perhaps more insidious protocol, a silent enforcer of the maitre d's decree. He placed a small leather-bound menu on the empty table where we had been headed, the one that had been implicitly offered and then withdrawn, then produced a small, elegant notepad and pen, his movements economical and professional. "And for your party, sir," he said, his tone shifting subtly, a micro-adjustment that suggested a prearranged scenario, as if he'd been expecting this all along, as if it were merely a matter of following a script. He looked directly at me, his gaze steady, unflinching, an almost unnerving intensity in his eyes. "The chef has prepared a special tasting menu for guests who wish to dine individually this evening. It's quite comprehensive." He paused, a deliberate beat to let his words sink in, then added, his voice dropping a fraction, a conspiratorial whisper that nonetheless carried across the small space. "The bill is $2,200. The words hit me not with shock, as one might expect from such an exorbitant sum, but with a profound, chilling clarity, a sudden understanding that pierced through the layers of polite pretense. This wasn't just about a table, about a prime spot by the window, about a birthday celebration. This was about a deliberate exclusion, a calculated act of social maneuvering, a carefully orchestrated dismantling of my presence. My sister, who had always been the one to wield influence, to manage perceptions, to curate the narrative, had decided, for reasons yet unknown but acutely felt, that I was not to be part of this specific family gathering, this carefully constructed tableau. The price tag, astronomical and absurd for a single diner, was the final stinging punctuation mark, the ultimate statement of my unwelcome status. It was a barrier, a financial statement designed to make me understand my place, or rather my lack of one, in the grand scheme of the Sterling family's social calendar. I looked at the waiter, at the expectant tilt of his head, at the expensive pen poised over the notepad, a silent invitation to acknowledge the transaction, to acquiesce to the terms of my exclusion. For a fleeting second, a surge of anger, hot and raw, threatened to bubble up, to spill over the carefully constructed dam of my composure. I could have made a scene. I could have demanded an explanation, pointed out the absurdity, the sheer meanness of it all, the blatant disregard for basic human decency. But then my gaze drifted, catching the sight of my father's weary posture, the subtle slump of his shoulders, my mother's worried frown, a crease etched between her brows, my siblings' averted gazes, their discomfort palpable. They were embarrassed, caught in the crossfire of a familial power play they likely didn't fully understand or condone, their own enjoyment of the evening tarnished by this awkward interlude. Causing a scene here now would only amplify their discomfort, would turn their quiet embarrassment into a public spectacle, a further dissection of a family dynamic already showing signs of strain. It would be my drama, my outburst, my catharsis, and it would serve no one but my fleeting ego, further alienating me from the very people I had come to celebrate with. Instead, I took a slow, deep breath, the scent of expensive linen and impending disappointment filling my lungs, a tangible reminder of the luxury and the underlying unpleasantness of the situation. I met the waiter's gaze, and for the first time that evening, a genuine smile touched my lips. It wasn't a smile of amusement or acceptance, not a concession to their judgment, but something colder, something knowing, a quiet acknowledgement of the game that had been played and my decision to opt out. "That's quite all right," I said, my voice even, betraying none of the quiet storm brewing within, the controlled fury that simmered beneath the surface. "I've actually changed my mind. I don't think I'm hungry anymore." I turned, and with a deliberate slowness that belied the rapid beating of my heart, a controlled departure that spoke louder than any shouted accusation, I walked away from the table, from the restaurant, and from the unspoken decree that I was less than family, less than worthy of inclusion. I didn't look back. I didn't call my sister. I didn't confront anyone, not then, not there. I simply left, the echoes of the maitre d's polite dismissal and the waiter's absurd bill fading with each step, each footfall a small act of rebellion against the perceived injustice. The real fallout I knew wouldn't be immediate. It would be subtle, a slow unraveling of perceived social hierarchies, a quiet reshaping of relationships. My sister, the architect of this exclusion, the one who had orchestrated this public humiliation, would likely be mortified if the extent of her actions became known, if the whispers started, if the carefully constructed facade of familial harmony began to crack. The questions would start to circulate. Why wasn't he at the table? Didn't they want him there? The manager of this esteemed establishment, upon hearing the details later, might find it prudent to review their staff's discretion, to ensure such awkward and potentially damaging situations were not repeated. The waiter, whose role was to serve, not to subtly enforce familial feuds or implement draconian pricing for solo diners, might receive a gentle reminder about the nuances of customer service, about the importance of discretion and diplomacy. When my family eventually emerged, their faces a mixture of relief at being seated and lingering awkwardness, a faint shadow of the earlier unpleasantness still clinging to them, they found me waiting outside, leaning against the cool brick of the building, a solitary figure against the fading light. My father looked relieved, the tension draining from his features, my mother almost tearful, her worry evident. My siblings offered tentative apologies and explanations, fragmented attempts to justify the inexplicable, none of which held much weight in the face of what had transpired. The explanation I offered them was simple, a single sentence that contained a world of unspoken understanding. I just didn't feel right about it. Later that week my sister called, her voice laced with an almost frantic sweetness, a performance of concern designed to mend the tear she had so carelessly created. She'd heard, through the grapevine, through the inevitable dissemination of information that follows any social disruption, that I'd left. She'd been so worried. I listened patiently as she spun a tale of miscommunication, of a mistake in the booking, of how she'd meant for me to be there, how it was all a terrible misunderstanding. I didn't argue. I didn't accuse. I simply said, my voice calm and measured, "It's fine. Really. I understand that sometimes, people have to make choices about who they include." The silence on her end was deafening. A profound acknowledgement of the unspoken truth. The carefully constructed facade of familial harmony had been exposed, and the discomfort it generated was far more potent than any raised voice, any direct confrontation. The ripple effect was palpable. My parents, privy to the subtle machinations that had led to my exclusion, began to treat my sister with a new wariness, a subtle but persistent shift in their interactions. The narrative of her being the perfect daughter, the organizer, the peacemaker, the one who always had everything under control, began to fray, to unravel at the edges. Small social gatherings became subtly awkward, her invitations met with a polite hesitation, a gentle questioning that hinted at a growing unease. The knowledge that she had deliberately orchestrated my humiliation, a humiliation that had been so publicly, if quietly demonstrated, clung to her like an expensive, ill-fitting perfume, a scent that announced itself to everyone within olfactory range. I never received another invitation to a Sterling family event that was not explicitly extended and confirmed by my parents, a clear signal that the unspoken hierarchy had been reordered. The subtle but persistent chill in my sister's interactions with me was a constant, quiet reminder of the fractured bond, the damage that had been done. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was final, a quiet sentence passed on our relationship. The quiet humiliation she intended for me had, in its own way, backfired, leaving her with a subtle but indelible stain on her carefully curated image within the family, a flaw in the polished veneer. And I found a quiet peace in that distance, a serene understanding that sometimes, the most potent justice is simply stepping away, allowing the consequences of one's actions to unfold naturally, leaving others to grapple with the uncomfortable silence of their own making, the echo of their own choices.